So, hello and welcome to episode 12 of Forensic Fix, a podcast brought to you from MSAB, where we invite guests from the industry to discuss the latest news in DFIR, current issues, and a general chat about all things digital forensics and investigations. So, I'm your host, Adam Firman, tech evangelist here with MSAB, and I am absolutely delighted to announce that today, as our guest, we have Debbie Garner joining us for episode 12 of Forensic Fix. So, Debbie, I was being a LinkedIn detective here, but you've got an extremely impressive career in law enforcement. And sorry to date, but it goes back 33 years of experience.
It does. It's okay. I don't mind. I don't mind being dated.
And during that time, you've worked narcotics, you've been a special agent, and you've held various high-profile positions with the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, the GBI. And in 2013, you became the ICAC commander for the GBI, working on child exploitation within the Computer Crimes Unit, where you held that position for 8 years. Now, following your impressive law enforcement career, you've held some roles within the private industry, but you've always remained close to your passion and beliefs by continuing to be an instructor and an advisory board member for some extremely important missions. Now, you're a self-proclaimed nerd cop. That's a term that I love, and that's certainly how I would have described myself. And one of my colleagues got me to mention that he had the term smart cops, and I believe you've had a conversation with Greg about that. Greg Masterson.
Yes.
Yeah, he loves the nerd cop and the smart cops, and he thinks that's no longer are we seen as the geeks.
Absolutely. So can I tell you how the nerd cop came to be? There's a story, and I'll try to shorten it. But when I became the supervisor of the Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, there were these amazingly smart agents and digital forensic investigators. And our digital forensic investigators were non-sworn in my office. And they really were not getting the respect and the love that I felt they deserved. Even people within our own agency and people outside of our agency truly didn't realize how amazingly knowledgeable and intelligent and creative and passionate that these people working these technology related investigations were. And, they even sometimes derogatory comments. And I felt as though, as their supervisor, it was my job to change that. So I sort of embarked on a marketing campaign, for lack of a better way to say it. That entailed a lot of press releases for all of the amazing work that they were doing, all the proactive operations, all the digital forensics, every arrest that we made or proactive operation we made, we talked about the digital forensics that were behind that as well. And as I started posting a lot on social media, on LinkedIn and Twitter about all of their amazing work, I needed hashtags. So I stole one from the Texas Department of Public Safety. They were using predators of predators, hashtag predators, and I loved that. So I used that. Yeah. And then I was like, you know what? Nerd cops. So hashtag nerd cops. And I started doing that around 2016 or 2017. And it seems counterintuitive, but I really, really thought it fit, and we embraced the nerd, Yeah. In our office, we even had it put on the walls, painted on the walls, hashtag nerd cops, and some binary, like we nerded out totally in our office, and it became their identity in a good way, and it actually earned them a lot of respect. It got a lot of attention, and it earned them some respect. So nerd cops actually started out as sort of a marketing morale type thing.
No, that's really great. And I come from exactly the same background. In our forensic unit, we had sworn cops like myself, and we had non-sworn, so civilian investigators, we would class them as. But it was a really good mix, because sort of the cop and my sort of investigation brain worked really well with my civilian colleagues who understood Linux. They understood the pseudo world and the binary, and between us, we help teach each other.
Yes.
So the fact that you celebrate that is really, really clever.
And when I started using it on social media, it sort of took off, and it's a lot. It resonates. I find that it resonates with a lot of people in this industry worldwide.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I, in that sort of short summary, we went off on a tangent about nerd cops, and rightly so. But I gave our listeners a small insight
Oh,
into your history and the journey that you've been on, and why you're passionate about educating people in regards to the global issue of child exploitation.
yes.
But for those of maybe across Europe and this side of the pond who aren't aware of the work that you've done in this space, can you give us some more detail about your past, your career path, and how you ended up being a board member for some of these amazing programs?
Sure. Sure. So, I started out with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation very young, right out of college. I went to college here in the United States, at the University of Georgia. And in order to graduate with a criminal justice degree, you had to do an internship. And I did mine with the Georgia Bureau of Investigation and was hired after that about 6 months later. I started out as an undercover narcotics agent. At 22, they hired me to drive all over the state of Georgia, buying illegal narcotics undercover in my own personal car for $17,000 a year, and I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah.
Now they don't do that anymore, but from there I worked healthcare fraud for many years. I worked in our fusion center, our terrorism intelligence work unit, helped manage the terrorism intelligence side of our fusion center here in Georgia, and I managed a work unit that investigated all types of crimes: rape, robbery, homicide, political corruption, officer involved, use of force. And then, like you said, the last 8 years of my career was as the special agent in charge of GBI's Child Exploitation and Computer Crimes Unit. And whoever holds that position in our agency was also the ICAC commander for the state of Georgia. And I will say by far that was my favorite assignment of my career. I went into it admittedly not having worked those types of investigations before, and I was supervising people that knew way more about those types of investigations than I did. So I learned from them. I knew how to investigate. I knew how to manage. I knew how to be, for lack of a better way to put it, a supervisor, an administrator. But they are the ones I learned from, the people that I supervised, how to work these technology-based investigations. I learned about digital forensics from the digital forensic investigators that I supervised. I learned about the tools from them. All of those types of things. When I retired and moved to helping companies in the private sector and continuing to help law enforcement with their mission, I, wanted to remain connected in this field and wanted to still remain a part of the mission, and did join several organizations, one of which is Raven. And Raven is a lobbying organization that was formed to lobby Congress here in the United States for additional funding for the ICAC task forces. There were other ICAC commanders that retired about the same time I did, and we had all become friends. We had all, well, truly become friends. We were coworkers and colleagues, but who became friends. And when we retired, we all felt as though we had left the people that we were supervising in this overwhelming situation.
Yeah.
That they had this overwhelming workload of cyber tips, and if they were working proactive investigations, adding to that, their budgets did not have in them what they needed for digital forensics tools or for enough people to work all of those many cyber tips. And they were burning out. And so we took it upon ourselves to form Raven to lobby Congress for additional funding for the ICAC task forces. Congress here in the United States has heard from great organizations like NCMEC and Thorn, and they have educated them on this problem, but they never had heard from law enforcement. How does it affect law enforcement once those cyber tips go from NCMEC to law enforcement?
Yeah.
They had never really heard that side of the story. So we are educating Congress on that, as well as assisting them with legislation that helps law enforcement work these cases faster, more efficiently, that sort of thing. You said other boards. I was super excited to be asked to serve on the Techno Security and Digital Forensics Conference Board. We're currently going through all of the submissions for speaking at the conference in Wilmington this year. So yeah, that's. I'm sure I'm missing some things, but
Yeah, so I was gonna. One of my questions was to ask you about Techno Security. That's a great position to hold, and you and I have seen each other from attending there. Wilmington's a great conference, and there's some amazing presentations that really I found that help people to get people thinking on how things can be improved, how they can go away and improve things in their local state area, for example, and a real eye opener. And as a board member, you've probably had an insight into that, and it must be really hard to steer and choose on what content to select. How on earth does that selection process work, if you can
So
reveal
I didn't
anything?
know until I started doing this. And this is my first year helping to go through a lot of the submissions. And I know I've submitted before and always wondered, what are they looking for? Because
Yeah,
occasionally some are chosen. The ones I think they're maybe weak, they choose, and the ones I think are strong, don't get chosen. But there is a selection process, and without going into too much detail, all the board members, I think there were about 160 submissions this year,
wow,
and we're trying to choose about 60 to 80
yeah,
to actually present. So there is a metric system. Some of the things that are looked at, is it a up and coming topic? So it might be obviously artificial intelligence or cryptocurrency. There's some secure, and it's not all. My background really in the technology space is CSAM and mobile phone forensics. That's what I
yeah,
know the most about. But there are a lot of cybersecurity type issues that we're looking at as well. But is it an up and coming topic? Is it a hot topic right
yeah,
now? Is what type of credentials does the speaker have?
yeah,
Are they a valid expert in their field?
yeah,
So there are a lot of things, and one of the things I will say is I'm sure that there are great submissions that aren't chosen because they there's so many great submissions,
yeah,
and trying to choose the best of the best is really what we're doing.
yeah.
So
But no, I'm looking forward to this year's conference. Fingers crossed, I'll be lucky. I've, like yourself, put some in
absolutely.
that I think are strong, others that I think maybe not so. But it's always surprising which ones come back. But
I submitted a couple this year too, prior to being asked to be on the board, and I have to recuse myself. Obviously, I mean, I don't want to, to vote on mine. So mine will be voted on by others, just as we're doing, just as everyone else's is, and we'll see where I land as well.
oh, that's good. That at least they haven't said to you, no, you can't do it. It's just you're
Right.
excluded from
It's just
those votes.
mine has to go through the same thing that everyone else does.
Yeah, and presenting at Techno is a great experience, and even attending the conference, you meet so many great people, find out about where technology is advancing, and being online is great, but you cannot beat that face-to-face interaction.
Oh, agreed. There are so many people, and I know you experience this too. There's so many people that I feel like I know online, or at least as colleagues,
Yeah,
that I know online, that we interact with every day on LinkedIn and Twitter, on professional social media. And then you finally get to meet them in person at conferences like Techno or Crimes Against Children or an ICAC conference or
Yeah.
something like that. And it's actually a lot of fun. One of my favorite things to do is go around and I talk to virtually everybody at every booth when I go to conferences.
And I think that's sorry to burst people's bubble that they think like vendors despise each other. That's not the case at all.
No, it's
Everyone's
not the case
working
at
in this.
all.
Yeah, people are working in this space because they believe in that mission, and you will find vendors, funnily enough, having a drink together and chatting because we're all in this industry for the same reason.
We really are. Many are former law enforcement, not all. So we have that bond, and we see each other all the time. And like you said, all the vendors that I have ever met are truly simply trying to help law enforcement with their mission. Each tool maybe does something slightly different. There's different price points. It is truly I think a collaborative effort, and all of us in this space know that multiple tools are needed often. So it is the vendors actually are friends from competing companies.
Yeah. And that leads me very nicely onto my next question. So you've got vast knowledge and experience working in the child exploitation world. What would you say are the biggest challenges that face law enforcement today with tackling this global issue?
So I mentioned it slightly, but I believe it's the overwhelming caseload.
Yeah.
So just in my own experience, and I'm an instructor for NCMEC right now, and teach law enforcement about the cyber tip line when they're new ICAC investigators or crimes against children investigators. So I teach them about cyber tips and from a NCMEC perspective. But just in Georgia, or well, we'll start nationally or globally. NCMEC received 32 million cyber tips last year, and most of those resolved internationally. But if we're talking in the United States, and then going even further down to Georgia, Georgia received 30,000 cyber tips last year, and we have 1.5 people to review all of them.
Yeah.
And then in that office, there are 16 people who investigate cyber tips. And then there are local law enforcement throughout the state of Georgia that help us. But it's an overwhelming situation. And I know the agents in my office probably commonly had 90 to 100 cases. There's no way you can work 90 to 100 cyber tips at once. But they're constantly prioritizing and reprioritizing based on information they get back, whether it's information from a search warrant return or from a subpoena. They get information from an intelligence analyst indicating that the offender may have access to children, and they're constantly prioritizing and reprioritizing all their cases, but they know that they will never get to them all. And they know that there are children who are waiting in that stack of cases for someone to help them, and they will never get to them because there's not enough time. There's not enough time in their day to work all their cases. Yeah. So the overwhelming caseload is an issue. Yeah. Now, once you triage them all and they get, that's where sometimes, digital forensics can come into play. But even before digital forensics gets to the point where it can help, whether it's faster, faster imaging or faster, processing of the data from mobile phones or anything like that, they have to get to that point.
Yeah, you still need the boots on the ground.
Yeah. Yes. So the overwhelming nature, and then what doesn't help are things like AI-generated CSAM and encryption, and there are things that just slow down the process. One of the things that Raven is working on is standardizing the information that the internet service providers have to provide to NCMEC. And there's other organizations that are like, we're all working on this together, but standardizing that information, because sometimes you don't have enough information to even start a case.
Yeah.
But there are many things that, sort of make this more difficult. And the volume of cases is one. Things like AI,
Hmm.
generated AI can be great on the other side, trying to find first generation CSAM,
Yeah.
but it can also be detrimental in creating um, computer generated CSAM.
Yeah.
So that is going to be a huge issue for a lot of reasons, both technically and legally, and globally. So
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like my previous guest, Jen Hoey, and it just came out before we recorded that podcast about Facebook or Meta with their end-to-end encryption, and rightly so. It was made Jen quite upset and angry about it, which I totally understand. Should these big tech companies pay tax liabilities to fund law enforcement? That would be a start.
that's a really good idea. I haven't thought that all the way through, but that's definitely that's not a bad idea. Um, yeah, I was, Facebook had said several years ago that they were going to implement end-to-end encryption. They got some feedback. They did not, and now they have
Yeah,
decided to do that again. Um, and I, those of us in this space are super disappointed by
yeah,
that. Disappointed is not a strong enough word.
yeah. And I was really disappointed in. People are going to shoot me down, but I'm an Apple person. Use Apple, and when they first came out and announced that they were going to start scanning people's iCloud accounts, I thought finally Apple are driving this innovation because they have the
Right,
technology. They're doing it whether we know about it or not. But
right,
they're openly, and I think if you walk down a street and surveyed 100 people, probably 90 of those people would agree.
yeah,
I don't have CSAM material, so yes, scan.
right.
But for some reason, they backpedaled on it, and I still to this day just don't understand the reasoning for that.
I've read a lot of articles on both sides because again, I truly try to understand both sides so that I can form my own opinion, but also fight better for what I believe. And many of the privacy advocates um, and arguments about the scanning on Apple devices really don't end up holding up. But it is very interesting. I would encourage your listeners to go out if they're interested in that. There are many articles that sort of give both sides of the coin. So
Yeah, and it's interesting because as digital forensic companies unravel what these companies are storing about us on our mobile handsets, Apple and Google are classifying our photos.
yes,
They're running OCR over them. You literally can run a search in your phone gallery for a word and it will find it within a picture. Well, how do you think that's happening? And do you
it
not think that these tech companies are getting that data back to make their platforms better? So they're
it
doing
does
it.
seem hypocritical, right?
Yeah,
To say we're not going to do this, but yet they're doing all of the things that you just mentioned.
yeah, yeah. And it does. And you're right in saying that it's good to have both sides of the argument. But a lot of these people who are against it, they like the fact that they can run a search for their dog and bring all the pictures of their
Hmm.
dog back. Well, Apple are running that technology, so why not let them run it for good?
Yep,
But yeah,
agreed.
so you touched on Raven, that, and you were one of the founding board members of that. And like I say, I can understand the mission behind Raven, and I think it's a really good idea because one of the difficulties that I saw we faced in the UK was not only or Parliament, as we call them, but ours was our criminal justice system. So when we were taking cases to courts for trial, and the actual judges were not understanding of the technology and what was available, that they would literally I've been in trials where there was a latest smartphone and they'd be like, right, I want that and they'd always use this term, which isn't technically correct, but I'll paraphrase them. I want that phone downloaded by the end of the day and the report back here. It doesn't quite work like that.
No.
So to me, the whole education space needs to expand from Congress, Parliament,
Yes.
also into the actual criminal justice system.
Agreed.
Yeah.
So it's interesting for me to hear that you have those same issues here in the States. It is, at least in my small world in the state of Georgia, we tried to educate judges. It's very difficult. They do have judges training, occasionally, but it's hard to get them to go to training that they weren't otherwise going to, and then to get your block of instruction in. But prosecutors and judges, I don't, do need to know about technology. I will say, when I first started as the ICAC commander in Georgia, even the prosecutors some didn't understand some of the technology, and because of that, the case would sit on their desk because they didn't understand how to explain it to a jury. No matter how many times we would say, we will handle that, let the digital forensic investigator handle that. These are this is a collaborative effort, we will help you explain it. They were a little bit scared of it. That has, thank goodness, I don't want to say it's taking care of itself. There's still prosecutors that are like that, but more prosecutors understand technology now, because it's not just technology, it's not just CSAM investigations anymore. It's all investigations.
Yeah.
Every investigation has a technology component, and virtually every investigation, every criminal investigation, has a mobile phone component.
Yeah. It is a part of law enforcement training now in the US.
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, because as you're aware, we're so fractional, we're sort of spread out many jurisdictions. So it sort of depends on which police school, which law enforcement training academy you go to, as to what type of technical training you're going to get. And also, it depends on if you're going to be, let's say, a patrol officer or a detective will hopefully receive additional technical training.
Yeah.
But it varies, and sometimes they have to seek it out on their own. It's not necessarily automatically provided.
Yeah.
But providing that education to law enforcement at every level, prosecutors, and, like you were mentioning, judges need to understand as well, because some of their asks, like you mentioned, some of their requests, their asks, their demands are undoable.
Yeah.
You can't, it's sort of one of my favorites from prosecutors is, give me I want everything on the phone.
Yeah.
Give me full forensics, and you're like, no, you don't really want that. What do you, to me, digital forensic investigators, tell them about the case, tell them what you're looking for, tell them what you need, educate them about your case. They become your partner in your investigation, and let them do what they're trained to do.
Yeah. I was talking to an ex-colleague, ex-law enforcement colleague, a few days ago, and he's currently developing internal training for sort of new recruits. And he's got an old case file from a phone extraction for a narcotics job. And he said it's the perfect piece of evidence because it has relevant search terms to look for. It's got the smoking gun, but it's also got a lot of other material that can cause officers to go down rabbit holes that they shouldn't be. And he likes that case file because it's really good at telling people, you've got to be focused. You've got to have an investigation plan in place. If you were verbally interviewing someone, you don't go in there and talk about everything. You have a plan. You plan for that investigation, and digital evidence is the same. So like you said, the judge asking for everything, we can't do that anymore.
Right. Especially with the size of phones.
Yeah.
There's no way. I think what we lean towards in the US is, say, patrol officers, people who are going to answer calls for service, need to know they need to know how to seize digital evidence. We have had instances of officers going out to take a report of, say, a sextortion report, and they are asking the victim to email them, the videos and photos.
Yeah.
They just don't know. They're like, okay, well, that's how I can get them. So there's training around, patrol officer. Then there's training detectives need. We did in my office, a little bit back to the Nerd Cop thing, we did create some training for everyone else in our agency, because there was a time where they were asking us, hey, how do you get information from Facebook? How do you write a search warrant for mobile phones? How do you turn an IP address into a physical address?
Yeah.
They didn't know these things, and so they would call the agents and the digital forensic investigators in my office and ask them to do it. Well, we couldn't work everybody's investigations, so we created a training curriculum, and to the credit of our leadership in our agency, we asked them to put it into our academy, and there was technical training added to our academy for the Georgia Bureau of Investigation that taught them how to get information from internet service providers and write technical search warrants, because they needed to in every investigation, whether it was a homicide or an officer involved use of force or a fraud case, they still needed to do all of those things.
Yeah.
But they were asking us to do it, and we couldn't do all the work. So
Yeah, and it's true, because I remember when I joined that sort of digital forensics world, it was mainly CSAM work on computers, and we were investigating people who had more storage than our entire lab.
right.
But slowly I saw that evolve, where sort of phones were 20% of the workload of our department, and it slowly outweighed, and then other devices came along, such as drones, then vehicle forensics.
Oh yeah.
And like you say, every crime scene was a digital crime scene in the end,
It is.
whether it's CCTV, body-worn cameras,
Yep.
vehicle forensics, Internet of Things that are housed around people's houses, and
Ring doorbells.
yeah,
Or I don't know if you have like video camera doorbells.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and then you've got to deal with, is it a Ring doorbell? Is it a Eufy doorbell? Is it a Chinese knockoff doorbell?
Right.
And
right.
these are all the
Yes,
things
yes.
that cops are having to change their mindset. And like you say, when we began, it was CSAM, and I think the majority of sort of the phone work that I was doing before I left was fatal road car collisions.
Yes.
Was the phone in use at the time? And
Right.
it was pretty much, our forensic unit ended up being involved with 90% of the crimes that were going on in our jurisdiction.
Absolutely. And that's not going to slow down. Like, that is the way it is now. There have been several studies done about how digital forensics is considered more important than DNA in many, many cases. In fact, because DNA isn't in most cases.
Yeah.
But digital forensics, mobile phones are.
And this is working beautifully, because this leads into my next question, which, from my intensive detective work on LinkedIn, and I've answered some of your polls that you share, I can clearly see that you're interested in how law enforcement is using AI and cloud
Yes.
to help develop and enhance their practices. And from the research that you've carried out, what have been your discoveries about how law enforcement are using it and could be using it?
So we'll talk about cloud first, since that was sort of that issue is pre AI as far as it being an issue. One of the things, one of my responsibilities has been to sort of educate law enforcement executives. I'm not a digital forensics practitioner. I was a decision maker who knows a lot about digital forensics. My job has been, one, to educate law executives who are scared of the cloud, about the cloud. So, hey, what are your concerns? And let's talk about those. And then educating them on security and the advantages of going to the cloud. All of these things, and the difference between cloud and on-prem. Sometimes law enforcement executives just are they don't want to be the first one to do it. They don't they need to have some reassurance that all of these scary things that they're hearing have been, those risks have been minimized.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it, that was a lot of what I was doing. So talking about the advantages of the cloud computing is a lot faster. It can be cheaper in the long
Hmm.
run. It can, it's more versatile. There's a lot of things that are advantages to operating in the cloud.
Yeah.
And with all of the digital forensic companies coming out with SaaS products and all of these things, law enforcement needed to be prepped, for lack of a better way to put it,
Yeah.
to feel that using those products are okay.
Yeah.
So the cloud, and then really the same thing with artificial intelligence. But really, my interest in artificial intelligence has been with a company trying to find first generation CSAM.
Yeah.
So there are companies that are trying to develop tools. And when I say first generation CSAM, I mean CSAM that's never been seen by NCMEC before, or IWF or
Yeah.
Thorn. Like, it's not in a database that is typically used, Project Vic. It's not in those databases. It's new CSAM. So you seize a phone and you use whatever hash database you use to pull out the known CSAM. There could still be unknown CSAM in there, first
and and
generation CSAM.
and that's the problem that we're facing. We spoke initially about that. That's the biggest issue. That I know some police jurisdictions here in the UK, and this will probably frighten you, that once they get those hits back, if they've got enough to prosecute and charge, that's it. They move on. They do not review the rest of that work.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings. I'm not going to
Mm.
lie. I have mixed feelings. I understand wanting to arrest an offender, move on to the next case because there's so many. I understand that, but you are not really serving victims that need to be found.
Yeah, because
So
of all that first generation. Yeah.
there's companies, and I'm not going to mention them, but I'll put them in categories. There's companies that have tried to develop a tool to find first generation CSAM by doing it themselves, developing the AI tool themselves, and they're using it by combining sexual images with young children. Like
Yeah.
they're training the AI tool on young faces, and then sexual images.
Yeah.
Those really aren't working very well. Um, if you need to train an AI tool, you need to train it on using CSAM. And
Yeah.
that is a challenge. At least here in the United States, private companies can't have access to that.
Yeah.
Now, in the UK, and there are some other countries where they have given private companies access to actual CSAM to train their AI tools.
Yeah.
And there are companies that have worked with law enforcement to use real CSAM to train their AI tools. And then if we go larger, Google and Meta have access to CSAM that comes through their platform, and they are using it to train tools to find first generation CSAM.
Yeah.
When that will make its way to law enforcement, I don't,
Yeah.
I don't
Because,
know.
and that's the hard part, because exactly like the point I just raised, and I was very lucky that, and again, you said the US is fractional. I can understand it because of the size of the US, but even in the UK, we were fractional. That I I was very fortunate. Sort of the police force that I worked for had a gentleman called Simon Bailey, who
Mhm.
was he was the
Everybody knows Simon. Yeah.
he was the sort of chief of child abuse for the UK. So he was very passionate about that industry, and we searched every image. Didn't matter what Cade or Vic highlighted, we still went through every single image. But that wasn't the case up and down the country because of their workloads. They say, for example, they got enough hits come back from Cade, they'd prosecute the case and move
Right.
on. But it frightened me because of all that first generation
Yes.
potential victims that they're missing.
Yep. I mean,
But
you know, I try not to judge what other agencies decide to do with their resources.
yeah,
Because everybody has different resources, they have a different number of people, they have different laws that they have to adhere to. They have different budgets and different digital forensics tools, and so I try not to judge. I definitely have opinions, and I want every child that needs to be found. Um, it's going to take a lot more resources for that to
Yeah.
occur.
And I go back to my earlier comment. That's where we should be hitting Zuckerberg and people with big taxes to help fund these sort of.
Yeah.
Because as part of why it's no different to, say, for example, McDonald's, who pay a higher tax for litter because it's an obvious issue that's going to come out of a fast food chain.
Ah, right. Yeah.
To me,
Consequences. There's
yeah,
consequences to them operating, and so they need to help with managing those consequences.
yeah, because I'm aware that I think Facebook certainly has, but where they have, and you and I both know because we've seen the toll that this has taken on trained sort of law enforcement professionals of reviewing that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
That Facebook, from what I've been told, pay fairly minimal for people just to sit there and review
Yes,
CSAM all day, which
that's
is
my understanding.
horrendous. Yeah. But yeah,
I, and I have a lot of contact with their trust and safety departments across many platforms. And while they say that they're concerned about the people that are doing this work, then I hear things like that, and I do worry about those people.
Yeah, me too.
I don't know how to say this. In law enforcement, I don't know if we have a different mindset. We know that we're going to see horrific things, whether it's CSAM or violent crime scenes or violent car crashes. We know that that's part of our profession, but for someone who gets a job with an internet safety platform, an internet service provider, doing that type of thing, that would be I would fear for their mental wellness.
Yeah.
Just like I do ours.
Yeah. And it takes its toll eventually, I think. Mm-hmm. Which is why there's normally shelf sort of lives in law enforcement that, hey, I'm going to be in this department for so many years, because generally you're burnt out, whether it's you're working traffic and picking up fatalities and but yeah.
It is. Do you now, in the agencies that you've worked for, or agencies that you know about, are there time limits for some types of work?
There is, but not for a mental health well-being.
Oh,
so
wow.
So for example, you could be on a plainclothes surveillance team, and you may burn your time,
right,
because you become too well known. But working in CSAM certainly wasn't like when I first joined. We used to have mandatory counselling. That was then taken away for cost saving. Yeah, for cost saving.
Wow, that's
it was then changed. Yeah, it was then changed to an online survey. Do you think you need help? Well, by the time you tick that box, it's probably too late.
Yes. Sometimes people don't tell the truth.
Yeah.
They just have to check a box.
Yeah, but again, I was only talking from my own experience.
Right.
That there may be other police forces in the UK where you're completely looked after, and
it's very different across agencies in the United States. It's talked about a lot within the ICAC task forces, mental wellnesses, and but not everyone has access to wellness services or resiliency training or anything like that. We did, and we even increased ours. Our wellness program, sort of expanded it while I was there, but we still could have done more with a more robust budget.
One area that I always think, because like the server that Andrew Rathbun set up with the DFIR Discord server, mm-hmm. technology-wise, this industry is amazing at sharing and helping each other.
Really
but
is.
in that sort of mental health and well-being, that hasn't really. I know DFIR Fit and things have tried to get off the ground, but it doesn't seem as well sort of vocalized at the moment.
And it's different across countries, and even within the United States, different across every jurisdiction in the United States. I do think maybe, at least here in the States, CSAM investigators, maybe it's talked about more. And here in the United States, mental wellness is being discussed more and more and more for all of law enforcement. So there is a change occurring, but it's very slow. And like you mentioned, when budgets need to be cut, that's one of the things that gets cut.
Yeah. And unfortunately, it's left as like a tick box. Oh, we're still looking after them because they're getting a yearly survey. Well,
I don't
it's
think
not
that's.
really.
No.
Yeah.
I don't think that's sufficient personally, but.
Yeah. And it leads me perfectly on to my final question of the day. And this one is the $64 million question.
Oh, wow.
If I could give you an open checkbook to solve child exploitation, how would you use it?
Oh, wow. Okay, I needed to prep for this one. So this is just going to be off the top of my head. To solve child exploitation.
Or at least put a dent into it.
Okay, so can I break up the funds?
You certainly can.
I can do any. Okay, so the first thing I would really want to do is enlist other experts, develop a think tank, not use much of the money, but develop a think tank of law enforcement, digital forensic researchers, really smart people who are developing these tools, and internet service providers. I would want to do a think tank, everybody around the same table. I literally have never seen, I know that there's task forces and there's, Interpol, and there are places where a lot of us get together, but I've never seen internet service providers, nonprofits, law enforcement, digital forensic companies, a lot of them, even competitors, I've never seen them all around the same
That's
table,
a really good point.
trying to solve the problem, legitimately trying to solve the problem, putting their competitive, aspects aside, which I don't know that that's possible. Yeah. But, I know, at least in my experience, I want to throw people at the problem. There's more cyber tips. We need more people. We need more money for digital forensic investigations. I have heard, many people say we can't arrest our way out of this problem. So it's going to be a combination of education. And I think education starting in schools. We don't really have mandated internet safety curriculum in schools in the States. It's
which is the point Jen, my previous guest, was sort of really helping to change in Australia.
Yes. So education, and then this I don't want to say task force, this group of all of the players in the same room. Law enforcement, this is our problem. These are our problems. Technically, digital forensic companies, we can build this, that type of thing. The internet service providers, hey, we can certainly, educate people more. We can certainly change our policies. We can do things as well. And lawmakers, I left out lawmakers. So all in the same room, trying to solve the problem, as opposed to me talking to lawmakers and then talking to the internet service providers and then talking to the digital forensic companies. I want everybody in the same room.
And that was the reasoning of an ICAT commander: methodical, targeted, and a full investigation. I like it.
I mean, everybody in the same room. I solved small problems that way. Everybody gets in the same room and we're going to talk this out. We're going to solve this problem. Small problems, big problems, everybody in the same room.
No, that's a good way of dealing with it. And I just want to say a huge thank you. I know it's early for you, Debbie, for joining us. But I'm sure our listeners who haven't come across you so far will have found your journey and your experiences extremely insightful. And in my show notes, I'll post a link to your LinkedIn profile so our listeners can reach out and connect with you and see the great work that you're helping to sort of achieve in this industry. And hopefully I will get to see you in June, Debbie. But thank you very much for coming on.
I hope so. Thank you for having me. I've had a blast chatting with you.
No problem. Thanks, Debbie. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks.